As Jesus said to the disciples, so he says to us, peace be with you. Now, when he says this to the disciples, just as he may be to us today, they are in any place but one of peace. They're huddled together. They're set apart. They've barricaded themselves in a room full of fear, uncertain of what lies outside. The very people that they believe led to the cause of the death of their Lord and the one that they had been following surround them. And they don't know what that means for themselves. And yet Christ comes into their midst and offers them peace. He hands them this peace, but it's not a free token of comfort. It's a challenge. He says, peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I also send you. Their gift of peace becomes a mission. His mission. And then he breathes the Spirit upon them and tells them, whose sins you forgive shall be forgiven, and whose sins you retain shall be retained. He empowers them to be instruments of reconciliation and sends them out to do what seems almost imaginable, to go and bring forgiveness of sin and reconciliation to a world that they themselves feared. The very world that they are being sent to give the gift of forgiveness to is the world that they themselves are unable to forgive. So in short, it's as though Jesus comes to them and says, peace be with you. You will find your peace by going forth and building it. Say, peace be with you, is for him to say, go and be peace. Now, what are those implications for us here and now today? I spent the last week in Washington, D.C. at the National Young Adults Ministry Summit. And so myself and a number of other young adult leaders, including Selena Chavez from our community here and Jessica Rios from the Archdiocese, and about 130 other people from around the country gathered to meet and share what we were doing to accompany and work with young people in their journey of faith, and to ask the question, how does the church respond to our current world? Because you wouldn't know it looking around this particular Mass this evening, but there is a mass exodus from our community of faith in the United States, greater than has ever been seen in the history of our church. And it's predominantly young people. And this is a challenge that faces us not just from a logistical standpoint, not just saying, oh, well, our pews are getting empty, or our tithings are going down, or all the things you need to make an organization run. The authenticity of our discipleship doesn't depend on numbers. It doesn't even depend on resources. It depends on holiness. But the true fact in this, and the challenge that we face, is the reality that our body, this body, the body of Christ, is not just a club among many other clubs. It's not just one place of belonging like anywhere else that you might decide to land that day. Those words and mandates from Christ of the forgiveness of sins are the foundation of our sacrament of reconciliation. We believe that it's through and in this body, this presence of Christ on earth in the presence of his church, that grace is known. It's through these relationships and this belonging that we know God's mercy, God's compassion, God's love, and God's forgiveness, God's transformation. And so when we are apart from it, or any part of the body is apart from us, the challenge of knowing the depth of that truth dwindles. So it's not a question of logistics, it's a question of salvation. And recognizing, as we hear from St. Paul in the second reading, that although there is one Spirit and one body, there are many gifts and many parts. And our wholeness is dependent on the presence of all of us. And so it could be very easy to fall into a place of despair, a place of fear, a place of wanting to turn in on ourselves and say, well, we are the few holy chosen ones, and we will persevere with our heads down and let the world swirl around us. And there was moments in our conference this week where that seemed like a possibility. But as we continue to share not only what the challenges were, but what the real successes we were seeing in our communities of faith happened to be, and trusting that the Spirit was actually at work within us as Christ promised it would be, then we began to realize that ministry and the proclamation of the gospel is the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. The form it takes and how it looks may be different. But the depth of the truth in that which we trust, the depth and the truth of who we believe has come to save us, and the loving God who pours out his mercy upon us, who gave of himself on the cross and rose from the dead to draw us back to life in God, who has sent his Spirit upon us to move within us and transform our being and bind us together by virtue of our baptism in ways far beyond our imagining. That if we trust in that reality, in that truth, in who we are as the chosen people of God, then the world can still be transformed. And so the question becomes, how do we preach the gospel today? It is the same gospel. Well, Pentecost gives us that model. As the Spirit came upon the disciples, as they themselves had set themselves apart, almost in a sense of apathy, being together amongst themselves but seeming unconcerned about the world around them, the Spirit descends upon them and impels them out, missions them. And they begin to speak in tongues where everyone present from all nations can understand that God wants his love to be heard, and heard in a way that speaks to every human heart. So the question isn't of the legitimacy of our gospel, and the question isn't of the authenticity of those who we don't see with us. The question is the communication and accessibility of that message that has transformed our lives. We are called by the Spirit to speak those words of truth in ways that touch the most intimate parts of our knowing, the depth of the language of our heart. While in Washington, we also had the opportunity to go and visit a president, not the president, not President Trump, but the memorial of Abraham Lincoln. Now, I'm sure as all of you know, Abraham Lincoln was the president during the Civil War. And one of his most famous acts was the Emancipation Proclamation, the ending of institutionalized slavery in our nation. Now, the reality of that, for him, was quite a journey of conversion. It was not a top priority on his political agenda when he became president. It was something he came to see the truth and the importance of because of the values that he himself held onto so strongly. The values of a unity of a nation that he did not want to see fracture, and the value of human dignity of those that were given to his care. And through the development of friendships and relationships and listening and encounter, he came to understand what his mission was as the leader of a nation. And so the depiction of him in the Lincoln Memorial, in this massive marble sculpture of him, he has one hand clenched in a fist and the other hand laid open on the arm of his chair. The fist representing those ideals that he refused to give up. Those ideals that he held onto so strongly that they drove his life. And the fact that he was so rooted in his convictions that he had the freedom to be open to explore the depth of what that truth actually looks like as it applied to his leadership as president. And because of that, I believe that he was one man deeply moved by the Spirit. For in quite a literal way, he stands with Jesus, who himself in the Gospel of Luke, as he unrolls the scroll of Isaiah and proclaims in the synagogue, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, and has anointed me, to proclaim glad tidings to the poor, to bring comfort to the oppressed, to provide sight to the blind, to let the captives free, and to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord." That's what happens when we encounter the Spirit. Our lives and the lives of those who surround us are fundamentally transformed. And so that becomes our call as a community of faith. Our call to discern, what are my gifts of the Spirit? What have I been sent here to do? What is my role in this body? And for us collectively as a community to say, what is our purpose? What is our gift? What is our mission within the larger fabric of our city, our state, our nation, and in our universal church? And so because of that, beginning today, we as a parish community are embarking on a new adventure, a time of renewal, a time that will bring us together in new ways that will help us reflect on these questions of who are we? What is our desire of holiness, and what does that look like? How do we define ourselves as community, and what does it mean to be together as God's holy people? And what is our mission here and now? To proclaim that gospel of Jesus Christ so that it may touch the hearts of those who surround us, because we have allowed it to penetrate our own. It's a challenge that requires us to also ask, what are our fears, and where are our closed doors, and where have we turned our backs, and where are we afraid to reach? And who are we afraid to encounter? And so you'll see in your bulletin a whole listing of different options throughout the course of the summer, of retreats and missions where we can come together and begin to explore these questions as a community of faith. I'll be facilitating all the sessions so that I can hear from you all firsthand what's moving in your hearts, and that you can hear from me. We can come together more deeply as a community of faith, that we can understand what it is that we must hold on to with clenched fists, what the truths of our lives and our faith and of this particular community and our 70-year history and the 2,000-year tradition in which we stand, what it is that we have rooted ourselves in, so that we may know how we can open ourselves up more deeply, to have the freedom to reach out and touch the brokenness in our world. And we'll be guided by the words of Pope Francis. A few weeks ago, he released a new letter to the Church, Gaudete et Exultate, to rejoice and be glad, where he explores these very themes, these themes of holiness and community and mission, and what that means for us as a people. So I invite you to be a part of this, to allow yourselves to be transformed, so that we as a community may know a new beginning, rooted in our history, but looking forward to ensure that this tradition continues to thrive as a conduit of grace and mercy for many generations to come. And if we do this well, then we too may proclaim that the Spirit of the Lord is upon us and has anointed us to proclaim glad tidings to the poor, to bring comfort to the oppressed, to restore sight to the blind, to let the captives free, and to proclaim a year acceptable to the Lord.